Product liability laws are designed to protect consumers from defective products, including vehicles. When you purchase a vehicle, you expect it to be safe and reliable. Car manufacturers, parts suppliers, and vehicle repair companies have a legal responsibility to provide products that are free from defects that could pose a danger to drivers and passengers. Victims of car crashes are often unaware that a defective vehicle or a component part may have contributed to, worsened, or caused the incident. Unfortunately, these manufacturing defects can lead to serious and sometimes fatal accidents. Even worse, some manufacturers knew of the defects and attempted to hide them. Cars can be recalled, but defective auto parts may be all too common on America's roads. Here are some of the more common auto defects. In any vehicle accident, the automobile manufacturer is often the first party to be scrutinized. Liability in manufacturing defects arises when the defect is due to an error in the production process, such as using substandard materials or failing to adhere to quality control standards. Liability in design defects occur when the vehicle's design is inherently unsafe, affecting all vehicles of that model. In both cases, the manufacturer can be held accountable for the resulting damages. Dealerships and retailers also play a role in the liability chain. Liability for selling defective vehicles arises when they knowingly sell a vehicle with defects, failing to inform the buyer or take corrective action. In this insider-exclusive Justice in America Network TV special, Justice in America, Alexandre Arrata Acevedo's story. Our news team sits down with Daniel Walker, attorney at Clark Fountain, Littky-Rubin Whitman, to discuss how his firm successfully represented the family of 25-year-old Acevedo, whose horrific death at 1:50 a.m. on April 28, 2017 in Miami, Florida, on his way home from his job as a server, that was triggered by a reckless, inebriated, out-of-control driver, Rodrigo Jose Solorzano, who violently struck the rear of Acevedo's Mazda. There was absolutely no doubt that the drunk driver, Rodrigo, caused the initial accident, but the challenge would be determining why the Mazda erupted into flames so rapidly that it prevented any chance of escape or rescue. As witnesses testified, that fireball explosion sent out a really big, huge red flag warning. It was so unusual that it prompted Daniel Walker and his law firm to investigate further. And lo and behold, upon extensive investigation, they developed a very valid and successful theory that Acevedo's Mazda vehicle contained defects which allowed the fire to rapidly expand into the cabin area. Had the defects not been present in the vehicle, the rapid expansion of the fire would not have occurred, and Acevedo would have been able to escape the vehicle, or nearby witnesses would have been able to rescue him. The National Highway Traffic Safety Agency, or NHTSA for short, regulates the safety of motor vehicles and related equipment. NHTSA laws and regulations are grounded in the principle that consumers have a right to be safe while using products as intended. When a car part is defective, the law demands that responsibility be taken by those who put the products into the market. In addition to the ingenious legal strategy investigation by Clark Fountain's legal team, Daniel will explain for all of us that there are only 3 basic types of product defects that can form the basis of product liability claims: design defects, manufacturing defects, and marketing defects. This is the Insider Exclusive, live from Palm Beach Gardens, Florida. It is my great pleasure to introduce Daniel Walker to the show. Welcome to the show, Daniel.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about what your firm primarily represents. What type of cases?
So at Clark Fountain, we represent plaintiffs in primarily personal injury cases. And we have a specialized focus also on product defect cases, and we focus on, fighting against the giants in the industry. We represent the little guy against the manufacturers, the Goliaths. So we don't represent insurance companies. We don't represent entities or corporations. We always represent the individual plaintiffs in the case.
We've done a number of shows with your firm before, and one of the most impressive things that I found with your firm is the ingenious ways that you get to the truth about, especially about product design. And today we are here talking about a case of your client Acevedo, who unfortunately died in a horrific car crash, but it went way beyond that. Tell our audience what I mean by that, and tell our audience first what exactly happened to Alexandre Acevedo.
So this case was a tragedy. Alex was a young 25-year-old man, and he was just traveling back from work one night down in Miami, and he was just sitting at a stoplight, waiting for the light to turn green, doing nothing wrong, properly seated, wearing a seatbelt, doing all the things that everyone does to be safe. And a drunk driver was coming off of the interstate and rear-ended Alex's vehicle.
At 80 miles an hour, wasn't it?
Very, very fast speed. And that resulted in almost an immediate fire erupting in Alex's car. Now, that is unusual to see that type of immediate, rapid fire expansion in a vehicle. And so the mother of Alex initially retained another firm to look at the case and pursue the case, and that firm filed a complaint on her behalf against the manufacturer of the vehicle, alleging different vehicle defects that would allow the car to become engulfed in flame as it did. And that firm, after a few years, the manufacturer began fighting that firm on what we call jurisdictional grounds. In other words, the foreign entity responsible for the design and manufacture of the vehicle did not want to be subject to jurisdiction in the United States. In other words, they don't want to have to present themselves in the courts here in the United States.
And it was a Japanese automobile manufacturer, Mazda.
Yes. So that Japanese entity said that they should not be subject to jurisdiction in a United States court.
That's a very interesting concept, if you will, because of the fact that when you manufacture something, no matter whether it's in Japan or whether it's in Nebraska, once it's in the commerce of the United States, you're certainly responsible for, what it can and can't do, right?
Yeah, we certainly agree with that. And I think that the laws are changing to the plaintiff's benefit. The history of the laws is that it's been very difficult in the past to connect those foreign entities to the products that end up in the United States because they use local United States companies to sell and distribute a lot of these vehicles. But of course we all know that we live in a very globalized world now, globalized market, and so these foreign companies, they know that they're selling these vehicles to individuals here in the United States, and they're targeting people like the consumers here in Florida.
When the case came to your firm, you started an investigation. And what did you discover about the Mazda vehicle that had erupted in flames so easily?
When the case first came to our firm, the prior firm had already engaged a number of different experts to look at the case. Accident reconstructionists, fire origination experts, design experts, and different individuals. And so we began looking at the case with a fresh start. And I went out and looked at the vehicle and examined all of the different parts that remained. And of course, in a fire case, this is very difficult because the majority of evidence in the vehicle has become burned up. And so we went out and looked at what was still there, and we were able to determine a couple critical things. Number one is that we were able to determine that the what is called the fuel pump access hole, which is a hole cut out in the cabin area of the vehicle, which allows access to the fuel pump that goes into the fuel tank. That fuel pump provides fuel from the tank to the engine. Well, that fuel pump and the access hole are under the rear seats of the vehicle. And when I went out and looked at what remained of the vehicle, I actually found the access plate, the fuel pump access plate, was still there, still remained, but it was bent and it was not where it should be. In other words, it had come off from that area. So what had happened in this accident, our defect theory that we developed was that when the rear end crash occurred, the gas tank became compressed, sort of like squeezing a water bottle and having fluid come out. And when that happened, the fuel was able to expel into the cabin area because of this access hole issue, where you are literally providing an access point from the fuel tank to the cabin area where the passengers sit.
Now, let me ask you this question. I understand that all cars are made like this, correct?
I would say a majority of vehicles.
And the history of why this is manufactured, please explain that to our audience. And when I say the history, there was another vehicle that Ralph Nader made famous, which was the one that put the fuel tank on the other side of the axle and then underneath the trunk.
Yes, the Ford Pinto was the very infamous vehicle that people know as the vehicle that was driving around and simply exploding during accidents. And the fuel tank at that time, the industry standard was to put the fuel tank behind the rear axle. Of course, we all know that that was not a good design. Since then, the fuel tank has been moved in front of the rear axle area.
And still is today.
And still is today. That is the common industry standard.
Why is it there?
So it's there. Well, the issue in our case about the fuel pump, the reason why the fuel pump is, or the fuel pump access hole is placed where it is because placing the fuel pump access hole where you can get to it easily provides easy repair, accessible repair. So it's a convenience. So manufacturers of these vehicles place the fuel pump access hole in the cabin area for ease of access, for convenient repair. So a mechanic doesn't have to remove the entire fuel tank to replace the pump. But of course, we know that you should never trade safety for convenience.
So everybody who's driving a vehicle today has got this potential defect in their car. And if they are hit at 100 miles an hour, just like in this particular case, they can suffer the same fate as Acevedo, right?
Yes, it's certainly a risk of any vehicle that has a fuel pump access hole that is in the cabin area. You are providing a direct access to the fuel source to the cabin area.
Now, you mentioned earlier the previous firm had brought in experts. Had they discovered this?
No, none of them had identified that issue at the time. And once we became involved in the case and went out and began doing our investigation and working with the experts, we were able to reinforce that defect theory with the engineers, with the design experts and everyone else, that this was a viable defect.
How did the legal team that represented Mazda fight this?
So there were a number of discussions and really, absent things that were filed in the public, all of the negotiations and things like that are confidential in the case.
In this particular case, right, your challenges were going after and proving that the defect caused the death of Acevedo, right? Because he could have been rescued, right?
Exactly, and that was an issue in the case, is that absent the defects in the vehicle, absent the fire spreading into the cabin area as quickly as it did, then Mr. Acevedo could have survived this accident. Yeah. And in fact, the witnesses on the scene were able to get the main defendant, the tortfeasor who was drunk and rear-ended Mr. Acevedo, the witnesses on scene were able to get him out of his vehicle. Unfortunately, when they tried to get Alex out of his car, the fire had already gotten to the point where it was impossible to get him out.
The U.S. Mazda entity claimed that they were not involved in the design of the product. How do they get away with saying something like this?
So this is how almost every car manufacturer operates when they have a foreign entity, which is the main headquarters, and then the U.S. entities doing sales and distribution in the United States. The response from local U.S. entities is always that they do not have any involvement in the design, in the manufacture, that all of that is done by a foreign entity, that the local U.S. entities, they just import the vehicle and then sell the vehicle in the United States. And so the defense that they always raise in product defect cases in automobiles is the U.S. entity says not only were they not involved in the design and the manufacture, but they don't even have any of the documents that would help prove a design or manufacturing defect, because all of those documents would be in the possession of the foreign entity.
Almost every foreign manufacturer has an office here in the United States, right, that represents the cars coming in. So how do you draw the connection? How do you connect the two?
So we connect it through a very intensive investigation into the business operations. How are they getting these vehicles into the United States? How are they distributing them throughout the United States? And how are they marketing to the United States? So we can establish through import records and through other sources how the actual product is getting from the foreign entity and to the end consumer here in the United States. And it is increasingly simple these days to show that sort of history, where in the past it was very difficult to get a lot of this information. A lot of this information now is publicly available. Also increasingly, most manufacturers are advertising, as we know, through the internet and through other web sources. And of course, they're advertising to people in their home states, and they want you to purchase their products where you live.
The medical examiner came up with an interesting report.
Yes, so the medical examiner was key in this case, because the medical examiner determined that the cause of death was not just what we call blunt force trauma from the accident, but in fact the cause of death in this case was the fire. And we know, based upon the medical examiner's findings, that Alex survived the crash, because there were findings of soot or debris from the fire in Alex's lungs. So we know that he was alive and breathing at the time and could have been saved and could have survived this accident had the flames not rapidly expanded into the cabin.
What would you say, as a result of this case, how defense teams now have to try their cases, considering the fact that this kind of set a precedent, didn't it?
Absolutely. And this has definitely changed the landscape for manufacturers that have foreign corporations that are doing business in the United States, because we are showing the court and we're showing the public that foreign entities are subject to jurisdiction here in the United States. If you sell a product here in the United States and there's a defect, you should expect to be responding in a United States court.
Do you sometimes find that corporations, let's say automobile companies, right, have some sort of shell companies where they're trying to distance the manufacturer that's in their home country from the representative company in the United States, and it makes it more difficult to make that connection?
Absolutely, and that has been the way that they have done this for years, and that's the reason why, or one of the reasons why, they have so many different corporate entities involved. They want to try to separate those entities out to try to minimize the liability exposure that the foreign entity or any one entity would have. But we are very used to this type of process here at Clark Fountain, and that's the analysis that we deal with in every case, is where is the trail? Where has the company started the design process, and how does it get to the end consumer and all of the corporations in between?
You settled this case confidentially, correct? Did it involve doing depositions of anybody in Japan?
No, we did not get to the point where we had to take any depositions of the foreign Japanese deponents or corporate entities. So we did not even have to get to that point in this case.
What would you say, because we made a point that everybody that is driving a car today has this potential hazard if they get hit really hard, and maybe the collision didn't kill them, the fire will kill them too. What do you have to say to them?
So I think it's definitely a concern, and I think that people should, push for their representatives to seek change in the automotive industry. I think that it's a very simple thing that can be redesigned to simply not have this access hole in the cabin area.
Your background is mechanical. As you mentioned before the show, you've done a lot of work on cars. What kind of change would you make in the design to make it safer?
Simply don't have the access hole in the cabin.
Which means that there's more labor involved if there's a problem with the fuel. They have to lift it up, they have to take the tank off. Costs more money, correct?
It may not even cost more money in the end run based on labor hours and everything else, because in order to access the fuel pump in the cabin area now, you have to remove the seat, you have to remove other things to get to that point. But in order to remove it, if you don't have that access point, like you said, you lift the vehicle up, you lower the gas tank down, and you just remove the fuel pump out of the gas tank. So it is a little bit more difficult, we'll call it. It may take more time, which could increase labor costs. And of course, as we know, corporations, the goal of a corporation is to make money and save money. And so it makes sense to do things in a way that are simpler. But of course, we know that safety should come first. And with something like this, it's such a simple change. All you need to do is remove that access hole from the cabin area and repair the fuel pumps the way that any other manufacturer has done who doesn't have that design in their car. Just remove or lower the gas tank and remove the fuel pump that way.
Yeah. What has been your experience over the years about good specific product improvements, the reception by the manufacturers?
Most manufacturers want to make their products safer. And I think that the push has to come from the public oftentimes, and the public needs to step up and say, we want this safer. We don't want to have this defect, this risk of the fuel causing a death where a death does not need to occur.
Yeah. How long did this case take to resolve?
So it took a number of years. The case was initially filed in 2017, and the case did not reach a resolution until 2024.
Your firm got it when? What year?
In 2020.
2020. It's kind of amazing the other firms, their experts, didn't discover what you guys discovered, which is why we're doing shows with you, because I find it very, very interesting that you can go that extra distance. You have tests, I imagine. Are there tests of cars slamming into other cars and seeing how fast a fire is created versus whatever?
Absolutely. You can do real world tests. You can do sled tests. Those are all easily designed tests and easy to do. So we have the capability and we have the experts and the resources to run those types of tests, and we often do in many cases.
Well, good job. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.